Hey everybody, this is Mark,
And this is Justin.
and this is Awkward Fist Bump Productions.
Bang.
Boom. Hey everybody, before we introduce our next guest, remember to subscribe, like, share the channel, do whatever you got to do. Help us grow. So, some people have told me that they really love 60 Days In guests. So, I was lucky enough to be able to get the original GOAT because when people talk about GOATs of 60 Days In, people talk about Nate, this new guy, Tony, Abner, but then Zach always comes into the conversation. So without further ado, go ahead, brother. Introduce yourself.
Hey guys, I'm Zach. I was on 60 Days In season 1 in Clark County, Indiana. My wife went on in season 2. Marine, veteran. Actually, I'm still in reserves. I'm currently on orders in San Diego, so that's where I'm at right now, and that's what took me so long to get here, is because, we work a lot. So,
hey, thank you for your service, by the way, brother. And
thank you for yours, Mark.
Yeah, when you did 60 Days In, were you actually still in the Marine Reserves, or did you re-enlist?
So I was in the reserves still.
Okay.
I tried to get them to let me, because it's called RIDT. It's basically you ask off for 2 months.
Okay.
I submitted paperwork to ask off for 2 months, and they're like, yeah, you're going to have to be here for those one day a month. And I was like, well, and I'm just going to drop to the IRR, because at the time I was done with my obligated time.
Right.
But you can drop to the inactive ready reserve, which means you're still on contract, but you don't actually have to do anything other than show up once every 2 years. So That's basically, I was like, all right, well, if you won't let me go, then I'll just leave. So I just left.
Right.
Came back after I was done.
That's outstanding.
Awesome. How long have you been a Marine?
So total time. So I went to boot camp in March of 2009. So, okay. And I've been on contract since then. Sometimes in the reserve, sometimes on orders, sometimes in the IRR, where I was doing the thing where I don't really have to do anything.
Yeah.
So basically, the whole time you were in Marine Corps, I was in prison, because I went in August of 2009.
Pretty much. I'm sure our experiences are somewhat similar, though.
To an extent.
I mean, you probably actually had a few more freedoms in prison to some extent, and then other ways you didn't.
Yeah, and you probably got paid a lot more money than I did, so.
I would say a little bit more, not a lot, a little.
You know, that's the one thing we never talk about because we're under a lifetime NDA, but you can't discuss compensation. But It's so funny when I run into people from my town that recognize me from the show, and they're like, "Why do you live here?" I'm like, "Trust me, they did not pay me a life-changing amount of money to."
That's the thing. Like, people ask me all the time, like, it's like my truck is 12 years old and has 147,000 miles on it, and they're like, "Why don't you have a nicer vehicle?" Like, because I work for a living. I pay for my own stuff. I trust me, it was a cost of living wage is basically what they paid us while we were in.
Yeah.
That's the best way to describe it. A cost of living.
Yeah, and hearing some of the people had to quit their jobs in the process to come onto the show, it's like, wow, I bet that money that they paid you sure went to bills before you get a new job, because it takes a while to get a new job.
Yeah, exactly.
So, what was the process? Okay, so for those of you that don't know, I've said this story again, and I still get people that hit my social media up. They ask, "Hey, how do I get on 60 Days In?" And now I can tell them, "Hey, this is the company. It's Lucky 8 Productions. That's the company who does it. But just because you contact them really doesn't mean anything, because they have a very weird recruiting process."
Yep.
I know it's word of mouth, because I know some previous participants have got other participants on the program.
Yeah.
For me, they found me on Facebook. It was just a weird recruiting process. So, guys, I love y'all, but stop hitting my social media page asking me how to get on. I can tell you the production company, but the chances on you getting on are slim to none. Yeah. However, when they came up to me it was already an established program. They were, I think, the third episode into season 4 when I left. So I think season 3 may have just wrapped up when they contacted me because it was a 6-month process. How did it work for you, Zach?
So actually, the way they found me, with me having been law enforcement and Marine beforehand, and so in Knoxville, Tennessee, which is where I was living back before they contacted me. I'd been living in Knoxville, Tennessee up until 2012. And when I was living in Knoxville in 2012, there was a production company that's based out of Knoxville that films quite a few TV shows for Discovery Channel and Investigation Discovery. And so they've always got Craigslist ads up looking for extras. And all the Craigslist ads says is, hey, do you want to be an extra on a TV show? You'll get paid, I think it was $100 a day cash to be an extra on a TV show. And so I was looking for extra money, and I was like, why not? It's $100. So I put my name in. They contacted me, and I showed up on one show. It was it's a show called Homicide Hunter on Investigation Discovery, and I was an extra on that show. So I'd been on TV once before, and then I'd been involved online, like social media presence, as far as military and law enforcement. So they saw that I had that background and that I'd been on TV before, on camera before, and they contacted me actually and said, hey, we're looking at filming a documentary. And originally it was going to be a documentary on, I think they had originally pitched it to like National Geographic or somebody like that, and it was going to be like a 2-hour documentary. It wasn't going to be anything near as big as it is. And they started in the process, and they asked me if I'd be interested in being on a show. They're like, hey, we're trying to film a documentary. And I was like, okay, well, what's the documentary? What's it going to be? And they were like, well, we like to go over a few things first before we tell you what it's going to be. So they went through a few things, and I think they had me sign an NDA then. And then they finally told me, so actually what we're going to have you do is we want you to go undercover in a jail. And they didn't tell me how long or anything. They just said, why don't you go undercover in a jail? And my wife was in the background of the Skype interview, and she said, oh, hell no. And the guy interviewing me goes, what'd she say? And I said, she said, oh, hell no. And he goes, yeah, that's about what we usually get. And I was like, well, I didn't say it. She said it. And he goes, what do you think? And I was like, I'm open for anything. And he's like, all right. And he's like, well, and so we finished our Skype interview, and he's like, all right, well, you talk to her, and we'll be in touch, maybe. And I was like, okay. Well, then like 4 months went past, and I hadn't heard anything. And in the meantime, we had moved back, because we'd been in Vegas when I did that first Skype interview. We had moved back from Vegas to Tennessee to be near my family because my wife was pregnant. And so we wanted to be close to family when she was pregnant and about to have a baby. And in that 4 months' time, I didn't hear a word. So I was just going on about my life like nothing was happening. And then I get a call or email or a call from them and said, hey, we decided to move forward with the project. Are you still interested? And I said, sure, why not? And talked to my wife. And so we talked about things, and we talked about the impact it could have on my career, whether or not they were going to pay me, how much they were going to pay me, what else we were going to be doing in the meantime, and so on and so forth. And we came to a mutual decision that, hey, I think this could be beneficial for my career and my ability to get back into a career in law enforcement. And we could probably help some people by doing this. And if they are willing to pay me, if they're willing to make it worth my while, and I wasn't at all thinking anything like life-changing money or even year-changing money. It was going to be like salary money. Like as long as they're paying me roughly, because at the time I was working, because we just moved back to Tennessee, and I didn't have a job set up before we moved back to Tennessee, so I was literally working a day labor job, making $9 an hour, I think, working day labor, working reconstruction basically, fire and water damage mitigation and stuff like that. So I was like, if it's better than $9 an hour, it's worth it right now, basically.
Yeah.
So we talked about it, and so they chatted with me, and pitched the number to me and everything else. And I said, yeah, I mean, it works. And talked to my wife. And she said, yeah, it's good. Go for it. So went in. Now, I wasn't aware. I didn't find out that they were going to talk to Ashley about doing it until they had already talked to her while I was in jail. And then she called me, or I called her while I was in the jail, and she told me on the phone, hey, some people called me about doing a job. And I was like, oh, yeah? And she's like, yeah, it's a job that you got hired for recently. And I was like, really? And I was like, how soon? And she was like, I don't know, like 2 weeks after your job ended.
Dang.
And I was like, and I couldn't say anything because I was I was in the jail on a recording line with people who weren't supposed to know anything listening in. And so I had to keep it under wraps. And so I was real careful with it. And by the time I got out of jail, she'd already agreed to do it. But even with that being said, like while I was in there, I was not going to tell her no, because how can I tell her no to something that she just said yes to me for? So, mutually beneficial, mutually supportive. So that's what I went for. So I don't know. I kind of went on a tangent there, but that's kind of how she got involved in it. But
that's fine.
How I got involved. And as far as you mentioned, and other people getting the show, finding other people through previous participants, I do know, so when I went back, they were like, hey, do you have any ideas or know of anybody that might be a good fit for the program? And so they asked me that, and I gave them a couple names, and then a couple months later, I called them up with another name and said, hey, I think this guy would be a really good fit. And he wound up going on to do the show, and he was on the
Narcoland. Yeah.
Narcoland. Yeah. Richie.
Yep.
Was the one that he had called me, and I called him and said, hey, I think he'd be a great fit. And he wound up working out, and they put him through. So, and now, from everything I've seen and heard and what I saw, he did a pretty damn good job.
Yeah, I agree. So they came up to me, and this is a story that, Justin, you've never even heard of before, but when I was doing the interview process, they actually came up to me. They said, we got this great idea. Your Army, do you have any friends that you think would do great on the show? Because we would like to put them in and see how you guys do, in comparison to each other. And I'm like, yeah, I got this buddy. He's a Marine, close guy. We've worked together for years. And I was like, yeah, okay. So they call him up. We do this whole interview process. And then they call me. Well, then we go for about 4 months without hearing, probably like you, Zach. It's like, okay, I guess they just gave up on us. And then all of a sudden they call me one day and they're like, hey, you still want to do the show? And I said, sure. And they said, okay, you've got like 3 weeks and you got to be here. And I was like, whoa. I said, okay, well, what about my buddy Sean? And they said, well, we're not going to go forward with him. And I said, well, are y'all going to call him? And they said, no. I said, okay, well, can I tell them? They said, no, you don't need to tell them. I'm like, how the heck am I going to go up to my friend who y'all had me recruit and then all of a sudden just be like, hey, dude, I got to go out of town for 2 months without him knowing? But that was just an interesting, funny story.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, no, that's yeah.
It's production for you.
More than that, but yeah.
Well, if A&E ever calls you and asks you if you know anybody, please don't ever give him my name, because I won't do
it. So the one thing that I've seen, it seems like consecutively through, there's probably 35 or 40 participants in the season and the history's run now. And the one thing it seems is the majority of participants, if they weren't anti-law enforcement before or anti-criminal justice system, they are now. How would you say your reaction is on that? Because I was law enforcement before, and I'm still law enforcement now. How about you, Zach? What do you say about that?
So I would say, I think it depends. I think it 100% depends on where they went and how the atmosphere was at whatever facility they were and how they changed. Because I know that, so like seasons 1 and 2, Ryan, so I keep in touch with some people from the show on almost daily basis.
Mm-hmm.
If not daily, at least weekly. Obviously, I keep in touch with Nate weekly. Talk to Ryan from season 2 weekly, and I talked to Matt from Atlanta. Matt and his son. I talked to Matt.
Okay.
There were 2 Matts in Atlanta, and I talked to the one that wasn't a Marine. The one that was a chaplain. Anyway, I'm not going to put his last name out there because I don't want to.
No,
I don't
not at all. Yep.
Put it out there or whatever. So that's how I'm trying to describe him. But anyway, and it's hard to describe him because people are like, "Oh, the long-haired Matt." Well, they were both long-haired Matt in Atlanta. So, but anyway, but yeah. So I chat with them about weekly, and there's a couple others that I stay in touch with, on a monthly basis at least. From the ones that I know, I haven't seen anybody soured towards law enforcement. Myself personally, I haven't been soured towards law enforcement. I'm not currently pursuing a career in law enforcement just because I'm on orders right now. The military is giving me, I'm trying to fulfill my military career as much as possible right now. So I'm putting the law enforcement stuff on the back burner also. And this is not, law enforcement is what it is right now. I don't know many people that are trying to get into law enforcement right now, honestly. Just it's not there. You're getting burnt at both ends. You're not getting any support from for the most part, the higher ups. For a lot of departments, the admin side of it, the higher ups at the departments aren't taking care of their guys, and then the public isn't taking care of the guys. So the guys are getting burnt on both ends. And I don't know how it is for your department, Mark, and I'm not going to ask you to say one way or another, but I mean, I've got too many friends in law enforcement that are getting burnt on both ends right now.
Yeah.
So it's not, unless it was a small town department that I know, it'd have to be the right situation for me to even consider going back into law enforcement right now. And that's not because I don't want to be a cop, and that's not because I don't feel like it's something that I'm be good at or something that I would be able to help people with. Because by and large, I don't think you're going to find one person. Well, obviously there's always an exception. I would say 90% of people who go into law enforcement do that with the intent of trying to make the world a better place and help people. That's not to say that people don't get jaded after 5 years in or less, but majority of people who go into law enforcement start out trying to help people. So as far as people anti-law enforcement now, I haven't seen it for the most part. I have seen that people that were anti-law enforcement before going in or were somewhat middle of the road before going in are much more adamantly anti-law enforcement now. So if you already had a little bit of a thing against it before you went in, you're way worse now.
Yeah.
So since 60 Days In started, and you were one of the first people in there, and to where it is now, how do you think it's gone more towards like the TV show aspect, or do you think that it's actually helping out counties around the country and how they run their facilities?
Great question.
So I have to give full disclosure on that. First off, I know that Sheriff Knoll in seasons 1 and 2 100% took it to heart and made positive changes in his jail and in his law enforcement in general, and used it as something to better his jail and himself and his ability to take care of his people both inside and in his department. I'm not certain that all departments since then have done the same. I know Sheriff Lamb, from what I've known and what I've spoken with Sheriff Lamb briefly on a few occasions, and from everything I see, he's a lot like Sheriff Knoll in that if you tell him, hey, there's something that's messed up and this is what you could do to make it better, he's going to take it to heart and he's going to try to make it better. That's not been what I've seen from all the different places that it's been filmed.
Yeah.
a lot of them have been lip service and not a whole lot of action. And as far as whether or not it's more, I think it's absolutely more TV oriented nowadays than
Agreed.
Because the original intent was it was a psyche valve basically. It was a study into the human psyche. It was trying to see how does it affect people and what can it do and how can it become better. And now it's a lot more about
the drama.
Yeah.
And what is it, 8 seasons now that they're working on, or
Yeah,
7?
I think they've done 7 seasons if you include Darko Land.
Yeah.
And I would agree with you, Zach. I think it's season 1 and season 2 were kind of raw, and it seemed like real. And they focused on y'all. They focused on the inmate stories. Whereas, and I've spoken about this before, there were a lot of things that happened in our pod on season 5 and me and David's pod that wasn't featured. It seemed like by the time they got to our season, and I can't speak for season 1 because I can tell you what really happened in my pod and what they showed. I can't speak on any other season, but I know season 5 there was a lot of good things we did, a lot of things we did that did not get featured, and they focused more on the fights. And it is what it is. I don't fault A&E. I don't fault 60 Days In.
You got to go where the ratings are, right?
Yeah. Well, let's be honest. They've got to make money, and they're not going to make money if they watch the majority of the time we're watching TV and making spreads, right?
Exactly.
The people who are watching because they like the fighting and stuff like that. So you on season 1, as I said, you are the GOAT. You are the original GOAT. I don't care. I mean, don't get me wrong. I love Nate. I love Abner. I love Tony, all the other GOATs that have come through, but you were the original GOAT. And I think it was because you're kind of a chameleon. You seem to be able to blend into any setting, and not only blend in, but exceptionally well, but you're blending in. So what was it like for you to walk in? Because we've got people that I'm trying to think of off season 1, like Robert, and I know you and him got into it on the reunion episode, but people that stuck out like sore thumbs. For you, how was your experience?
So, I mean, I think that, and Mark, throughout the show, we've seen that guys with the military background typically tend to fare better than anybody else. Throughout the course of the show, guys with military backgrounds have fared better inside than guys without the military background. Myself in season 1, Ryan in season 2, as far as blending in with the inmates, Nate in seasons 3 and 4.
The other Matt was a Marine, and he did a good job, I thought.
The other Matt he was a Marine, and then all of us, yourself included, we all figured out our ways to adapt to the situation. I mean, that's what the Marine Corps, or not just the Marine Corps, that's what the military in general teaches you, is it teaches you how to blend in with a large group and not make waves. And that's kind of what my focus was. When I was at boot camp, Marine Corps boot camp, my goal, my buddy, the best piece of advice my buddy gave me, he was a Marine, he was already out of the Marine Corps, but he had been a Marine himself, and he said, best piece of advice I can give you is, if you can make it through the 90 days of boot camp without anybody knowing your name, you've done your job. And so that was kind of what I was trying to do, was try to blend in, because if I blend in and just become one of the people, then they're going to just start including me and stuff and start giving me info without me even having to ask for it. And so that was what I was trying to do. And so my intent, like 100% my intent when I first got in, was I'm going to be as quiet as possible and just go along, go with the flow. Not, if it doesn't concern me, it doesn't concern me. And that's how I'm going to play it until they pull me into stuff. And it spoke for itself. I mean, I got invited into, so the first pod I was in, I got invited into a room. I think it was inside of 2 weeks or 3 weeks, something. I got invited into a room. The next pod I moved into, I got invited into a room even quicker and got involved and started learning knowledge and getting information about things just by keeping my mouth shut.
Right.
And part of it, I think, also I can attribute to the fact that I have a background in the service industry as far as being a bartender or server, and you learn as a bartender and server as you're waiting tables or whatever, you learn how to, if you ask people about something that they really love, they'll open up to you and they feel like you because they add their love of their interest, they associate it with you. I mean, it's basic strategies as far as like being a salesman even. So that's kind of what I use. And it basically, like anytime you're selling a product, you're selling yourself. And so I was just selling myself without the product, basically. And I was not meaning that in any type of sexual connotation.
He was making them soups.
The soups ain't that good.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think Zach's right. The military people have always. There's only been one. There's been 7 seasons, and one person dropped out. That was in the military.
Yeah.
And we. Go ahead.
Yeah, I've spoken to him.
Yeah, he's actually a good dude.
Yeah,
we interviewed him last week. He's a great guy. He just wasn't cut out. But I would say our military records kind of speak for themselves because only one person has quit that was military. Go ahead, Justin. I'm sorry.
I was gonna say, was there anything that they didn't show that that you can speak on that you wish they would have?
So honestly, with the first couple seasons, and specifically with my season, I know a little bit about the second season, having spoken with Ryan as much as I have, and then with having my wife having been a part of it. She told me like the majority of the first 2 seasons, they didn't really edit a whole lot out, and they weren't able to chop the storylines as much. The only thing they were able to edit was something may have happened this day, and then something else happened this day, and they flipped them and made them look like they happened in reverse or something, like to make a storyline flow better. But as far as like stuff that was in that shouldn't have been, or stuff that they didn't put in that I think should have been in, honestly, there's not a whole lot that I can think of that they left out. In my season, there was some fighting. They played it. There was more camaraderie and guys like one of the things that they didn't play as much into from my season was there was a lot of guys that were willing to help people out, and it wasn't just trying to use you. Like there were guys who would do that and say, "Hey, I'll let you have this, but you owe me." And then there were other guys, like I never once had a guy say, "Hey, I'll let you use this, but you owe me."
Yeah.
Like the people that offered me stuff, they actually just offered it to me, and I never had to pay it back, and they never came at me for it or anything like that. And then there were guys that would need something, and I would help them out, and it was just But I think what it boiled down to was they don't prey on, like they like to prey on the weak. And I came in, I was quiet, and I stayed to myself. And I think this is one of the things that they didn't show, but one of the guys came up to me, and he was like, "Hey, you're lucky we're over here where the cameras are, because if we were still over in the other pod where they ain't got the cameras, since you don't know nobody in here, you'd have to get jumped." And I was like, "Oh, yeah?" And he said, "Yeah," and it was my turn. And I was like, "Oh, then you're the lucky one." And once I said that, they're like, "Okay." And from then on, like the fact that I had the balls to stand up for myself and say, "Let's go." And then there was a couple times in that they didn't show where one of my bunkies got into it because somebody tried to cut him in the chow line, and it happened to be part of the gang. And so he came back to my room, and he wasn't paying attention. He was just, the guy tried to cut in front of him in chow, and he yelled at him, and they like pushed at each other a little bit, but the guards were there, and they said, "No, you wait in line." And they gave my guy his chow, and gave the gang guy his chow, and whatever. My guy came back in the room, and I went out there, because I heard them yelling and running their mouths upstairs. I looked up there, and they were all booting up, lacing up. And then, so I looked in the room. And at the time, we had 5 guys in my room, 4 on the racks and 1 in the boat in the back of the room. And I just looked in the room. I was like, "Hey, Joe, put your shoes on." And he looked, and I had my shoes on. And so all 5 of us just laced up right then. Like, my room was, we were gonna roll. Like, we were ride or die. We were gonna roll with each other. And the fact that I had already laced up, sorry, I gotta plug my phone in. But the fact that I had already laced up before I even told Joe to, and I was ready to go, and they saw that I was ready to go, those guys had my back. And inside. Now, whether or not they'd have my back now, but honestly, I've had one. Honestly, all I can think of, I've had one negative reaction since I've been out. In the last 5 years, I've had one negative reaction from somebody that was inside. The majority of the guys that I knew inside, I still talk to some of them, some of the actual inmates on a weekly or a bi-weekly basis, and it's never been a negative thing. It's a, "Hey, how are you doing?" And they check in with me, and I check in with them, and I like to check on them, because the biggest thing that I would say I learned from 60 Days In is the majority of people aren't bad people.
Yep.
They might make a mistake, and they have to pay for it. But while they're in there, they have to do what they have to do to survive. It doesn't make them a bad person. They're paying for their mistakes, and they're having to survive however they can while they're in. Now, there are some people who have been a part of the system, and they start getting cycled through the system so often and for so long, they're just stuck in it, and they don't know how to get out. And those people, it is what it is. I mean, those are the guys that are going to take a lot longer to pull back out of that system. But at the same time, that's not to say that there's any lost causes. It's just some of them you got to work a lot harder for.
Oh, yeah.
And I would say that there are people, and I know we all 3 agree, that deserve to be in prison. They deserve to, some of them for the rest of their life. Yeah. But I know a good chunk of people that I met in there were just people that screwed up, and they kept, I tried to pour into them and say, "Hey, don't do anything stupid again." And I hope they learned. But I love how you brought that to our attention, Zach. There are people that I still talk to today that were in my pod. I have not, and I know who the person you had a negative interaction was. I saw it on Facebook. But and we'll keep. And it was
honestly it was a misunderstanding on his part.
Yeah, but I know A&E is very, very like, "Hey, don't talk to these people. Your security could be at risk." But the majority of us live out in the open on social media as 60 Days In people.
Yeah.
So that's how I've been able to have some of these relationships. In fact, we've got an interview with an inmate that was in my pod coming up in a couple of weeks. He gets out, and I think he's down to about 22, 21 days now. So hopefully in the next month and a half. And he's a good dude. I've never received a death threat from an inmate. I mean, there might be a couple somewhere in the system still that don't like us, but as far as I've never received a death threat. I think they were pretty open, because I didn't rat any of them out per se. I mean, I was there to make the system better, not only for the staff, but also for the officers. I mean, not only for the officers, but for the inmates. Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think the majority of them saw it that way. But
and that's how most of the guys that I was with too, and even so, one of the guys that I stayed in touch with was a guy that had been grooming him to join one of the gangs, and had been trying to talk to him, and he's still somewhat involved with that crowd, but he's not a part of that gang now. And I talk to him still, and and he knows, like, he's told me, he's like, "Hey, the reason that I still talk to you is because you came at me with honesty. I knew that you were there trying to help people. And I can tell that just from talking to you." And I'll hit him up and say, "Hey, buddy, you good?" I'll see, he'll post something and say, "Hey, are you good?" And he's like, "Yeah, man, just life is tough sometimes." And we'll keep talking. There's, I mean, off the top of my head right now, I can think of at least 4 different inmates that I've had a very positive relationship since I've been in there, if not more than that.
Mm-hmm.
That's cool. That's really cool that y'all are able to still speak with them. Like, and I don't put 60 days in down. I don't put anybody that's been on the show down. I just don't think it would work if they ever tried to do it in a prison setting. I think it works. It works inside of the county jail, but I don't think it would ever work inside of a prison though. Because
I would have to agree with that to
Yeah.
a degree, because
Well,
it's two different worlds.
yeah. Well, by the time you get to prison, you've been in county, in some cases 3 and 4 years. And if you don't have the story of my time in county, then it's not going to work. So I agree.
Yeah.
Well,
I mean, I did
that,
18 months in the county, so.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that and then the mentality of, I mean, if you're in prison, your mentality is so much different than jail. Guys are still trying to party while they're in jail. They're doing whatever. When you're in prison, from the guys that were in the jail that I was in and I talked to that had already been to prison and gotten out and then gone back into jail, they're like, man, prison and jail is two different things. Prison, it's a lifestyle. You're in there for the long haul, and that's what you're thinking about. And all you're thinking about is, I'm trying to cut my time. So you're not trying to get involved in nothing that doesn't cut your time.
Yeah, it's way different.
Well, y'all, I'm going to go ahead and cut this interview because we're already at about 33 minutes, 34 minutes. And I know we're trying to be respectable of your time, Zach. But thank you so much, man.
Yeah,
thank you for being on the show.
I genuinely appreciate y'all having me on. I'm sorry I wasn't able to get here quicker.
No, it's good.
I really appreciate y'all having me. It was a pleasure talking to both of you. Pleasure meeting you.
Yes, sir.
And I definitely look forward to speaking with y'all again in the future. If y'all ever want to have me back, I'll come back and talk some more.
Oh yeah, we would definitely love that. And all right, y'all. Well, as I said, if you love our channel, subscribe, like, share. Hit that awkwardly fist bump. I always forget that part. Awkwardly fist bump that subscribe button. If you want to be a Patreon member and support us financially so we can get better equipment, the link will be in the bio. Thank you again, Zach, and we will talk to y'all later.
See you guys.
Yeah.
All right.